Hey guys, this is Tyler again with NoobGamer.com. Sorry this one took me so long to get up. I ran into a bug that it took me forever to figure out. So let's start coding. So let's go ahead and hop into the aggregator solution. Before we get started, I want to make a note about some code that we don't need anymore, the feeds property. Uh, I had originally intended this property to keep up with the feeds that were loaded, but we don't really need it here because we would have to keep this particular property up to date. What we can do instead is just go down to our get feeds from config and just call that whenever we need the list, so that we always have an up-to-date version of our feeds list. This also means we need to go into the code for the form and change the load list box function to use that get feeds from config and then convert it to an array. So moving on, this video is going to be about actually displaying the feeds in that browser control we created so long ago. The first thing we need to do is go to our design view of our form, go over to News, click on the panel, the Metro panel control, go down to, in your Properties window, go down to the Auto Scroll property and just set it to True. So we're going to need just two extra classes. One is going to handle pretty much displaying everything on this news tab. The other one is going to be a kind of a helper class to help us write some HTML that we're going to use and populate into this web browser control. The first one is going to be called DisplayManager. So I'll add it. And the other one is just going to be called, what did I call it? HTML Writer. So let's go to the DisplayManager class, and I'm going to paste in some code. And we need to fix the squigglies. And that took care of them. So what we've got here are a couple of properties that are going to act as references to controls and class instances in our aggregator form. And then we're setting them to private, and we're only adding the get property. It's not a property, is it? We're only adding the get function to these properties because we don't want them to change after the display manager is created, except for the selected tile. Now the selected tile, so let's jump ahead just a little bit. The way we're going to display these feeds on the GUI is, if you remember that Metro panel control, we are going to create Metro tiles and populate those into that panel, and we just want to have a way to keep track of which one the user has actually clicked on, and that's what this selected tile does. Okay, I'm going to paste some more code in. Now this is going to handle the actual creation of those tiles I was talking about. So let's go ahead and fix these squigglies. We'll leave that one alone because we're going to create that in just a little bit. So this first function, add tile, just takes a panel control and a tile control, and then we use a little bit of link to figure out how many tiles we currently have in that Metro panel, and then we set the location of the tile we're adding based off the amount of the number of tiles that are in there, and then finally this last line actually adds the tile. And the create tile function, it takes a feed, and we're going to create the tile. Then we're going to set some properties here, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. You can kind of look them up and see what they do. Then we're going to make sure that we set the tag of this tile equal to the feed that we're passing in so that we can get some information from it whenever we need it. Then we're going to add a click event to it, and this is that load feed in browser, which is a function I'm going to paste in here in a second, and then we're going to return it. And before we paste in the load feed in browser function, let's paste in a couple more. So update tiles again just takes a panel, and we're going to unload all of the tiles, and then we're going to load them back, and that's what these two functions do. So load tiles is going to loop through the get feeds from config, so the list of feeds in our feed manager, and then for each feed we're going to create a tile, and then we're going to add it to the panel. Then we have the unload function, and the first thing we're going to do is set the selected tile equal to null. Basically, whenever we're updating these tiles, the user hasn't clicked on them until they actually click on them. So we don't want to have anything left over from some of the other functions that we're going to do. And then we are going to again use link to pull out all of the metro tiles in the panel, the metro tile controls. Then we're going to loop through each of them and remove them, and then we're going to make sure we dispose of the tile. And the reason you have to do this is that if you do it improperly, you can run into some memory leaks, and this dispose function on the control itself actually it makes sure that all references to these tiles get lost. And then we're going to set the auto scroll position back to 0, and we may be able to get rid of this line, so let me just delete that out. This is related to the bug I was telling you about in the beginning of the video, and hopefully we won't run into it, but whenever we get a little bit further along, I'll try to go back and explain this. Now before I show you the load feed in browser function, let's hop on over to our HTML writer class and create it. So let's paste some code. And remember, this class is just supposed to help us write the HTML for our web browser. So I want to show you something. This is the code for the original application that I wrote a long time ago. And this is how I handled the CSS, the HTML, and all that. And it's terrible. Trying to debug this and change things, it's awful. So I wanted to find a better way to do it. So let's get back out of this. So we've got an HTML variable and a CSS variable that are private. Then we've got an HTML property that will add the style tags for our CSS, and then concat the HTML as well and return it. And of course we have our initializer, or our constructor, that sets the CSS and HTML to a blank string. Now if you don't know anything about HTML and CSS, I highly recommend that you go and watch a few other videos on the subject. I don't have any up right now, but there's a ton of them out there, so just go and get familiar with it and kind of see what's going on with it. So let's paste in some more code. And this first function is called create paired tag, obviously. So we're going to pass in what we want the tag to be. Then we're going to pass the classes we want to assign to that tag, and then we're going to pass in what goes into that tag. So all we're doing is building the tag as a string, and then we're just returning it. Let's paste in a few more. So create link is going to do something similar to the create paired tag function. It's just going to create the string representation of an anchor element and return it. And then the create single tag is very similar to the create paired tag, except these tags don't have any contents in them. This is more of like a horizontal rule or like a BR break tag. Okay, we've only got two more functions. This one is going to be the add tag function. So we're going to take one of these strings that we've created, and then we're just going to add it to the HTML variable that we've got here. And then we've also got the add CSS rule, which of course handles the CSS. So again, it's a similar concept as our tags. So we're going to create the beginning of the CSS statement. So this would look something like, what's the best way to do this? So dot wrapper, then background, make it black. So this is essentially what we're creating with this function. We're going to loop through the properties and just add them to this CSS string, and then when it's all said and done, again, we're just going to update our CSS variable with this new property. I'll go ahead and take that out. And I promise all of this will make sense in just a second. So let's go back over to our DisplayManager class, and then I'm going to paste in the load feed in browser function. Now this one's kind of a doozy, so just bear with me. Okay, so let's fix this squiggly, and we can't do it in the usual way because apparently item is used in a lot of places. So just go up to the top, and it's using XML Parser .tags, and then that will fix this error here. So let's start breaking this down a little bit. HTML is just the new instance of our HTML writer class. Now feed, we're having to do some casting here, but this sender parameter, if you remember back in our create tile function, we're adding this function as an event, a click event to our tile. So whenever the tile is clicked, the tile itself is passed into this function. So in order to use it as a tile or metro tile, we have to first cast it to a metro tile. So once we cast it to the metro tile, then we have access to this tag, which stores a feed. And because the tag is just an object class, we have to again cast it to the variable that, or the class type that we want it to be, and that's where we get the feed variable. Okay, moving on, we have this TryCatch statement, and the reason why we're having to put this inside a TryCatch is this is the point where we actually try to load the feed for the first time, and if the URL on the feed doesn't work, then we catch that error at this point and let the user know what happened. Okay, so for our feed name tag, we are going to use our HTML writer to create a paragraph tag, and we don't have to give it any classes, and we're just going to put the name of the feed in as the contents, and then we're just going to add that tag to our HTML. Okay, then we have some CSS. So this HTML CSS is going to be the CSS rule that we want to apply to the whole document. So we're just going to change the font here, and I'm doing it whenever you're typing these properties in, you have to type them out as full CSS properties, but you don't have to worry about the semicolons because the HTML writer class adds that for you. So then we're just going to add the CSS rule to our, we're going to create a rule for the HTML tag or selector, and then add that property to it. And then the same with the wrapper. So we've just got an array of strings here that has all these properties, and then we're just going to pass them to the .wrapper selector. The same with the section, and the same with the horizontal rule. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing. We're going to loop through all of the items in the feed, and for each item we are going to pull out the pub date, then the item description, the title, and we're going to have some spacing elements here, uh, and then we're going to have another link here, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the things that get confusing here is that this div, the wrapper div, is not going to have just one item in it. So we're having to concatenate these tags together. Well, this isn't a tag, but it's the same principle. We're going to concat these two together and then pass them in as the contents of this div. And then the same concept with the create paired tag, the full tag. We're just going to add all four of these tags together to go inside this one div, and we're going to give it the class section. So going back to this link tag. So one of the things you're going to run into with some RSS feeds is that they use local links or relative links inside of their XML. And what that's going to do for your project is that when you try to click on those, it doesn't have the domain information to put in front of those relative links, so it's not going to actually go to any of the links inside of your display. So I like to have this link in here because the item.link is something we're pulling out of the feed that is a direct full link to that particular article. So it's just a way to give the user a link that works to take them to the full page. And then after we've done all of this link or all of this building, we're going to finally add this tag to our HTML. So once we've done that for all of the items, we are going to set the browser document text equal to that HTML property. Now if you remember, that HTML property goes through and concatenates the CSS and the HTML together so that we have one cohesive HTML document that will fit nicely into this browser. Now browser, if you remember, we have this browser property that whenever we create an instance of this class, we pass a web browser control to it. So this is how we're getting access to that browser. And then the same thing with the timestamp, which you'll see here. We're just going to set it to, well, here. We're going to get what time it is now, so that's datetime.now, and we're going to do some funny stuff to it and set the text of that label equal to this. Now time.toString with these tags in it, let's see, T I think sets it to, so T is the time, and then D is a capital D is the full date. So you'll see that in a second whenever we test this. And then lastly, we finally set the tile that we have selected equal to the tile that sent this click action. Now that we have these two things done, now we can actually add them to our form. So let's go over to the code of our ag form. So let's add some stuff in here. So first we're going to create a variable to hold our DisplayManager. And then, come on. In our load app function, we're going to actually initialize it. And we're going to pass in our feeds manager and the WB display, which is the web browser that we created in the GUI, and then the label, which is, so we have, this is the label and this is the web browser. So we're just passing those in. And then the first thing we're going to do is tell it to update the tiles. So PN tiles is this panel. Okay. Now there are also a few other places we need to add this. So we need to add it whenever we add a feed. So add items to list box, so we're going to add it here. Then we want to add it whenever we edit a feed. Then we want to add it when we delete a feed. And on this one, make sure you do it outside of the loop, because we don't want to be updating this. Let's say we have 5 items selected. We don't want to update the DisplayManager until all of the items have been deleted. If we had it inside this loop, it would update it every time each item is deleted. And I think those are the only places we have to add it. So the very last thing we need to do before we can call this good is handle our update news click, or our update news button. And let's go over to the ag form and double click on it so that we can create our function. And I'm going to paste some more code. So what we're doing is we want to look at the DisplayManager and make sure that there's a selected tile. And if there is a selected tile, then we're going to tell it to perform that click action. So essentially, all the update news function is going to do is simulate reloading one of these documents, one of these feeds, and then of course if there was no feed selected, we can't update anything, so we're just going to let the user know that. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's test it. So Control plus F5. Let's try this Harold Baldwin. And there's our feed. Then we can add a feed. So let me pull one up. So this one's going to be, crap, Thornton May. Now we can go back here. Uh-oh. So this is that bug I was talking about that I ran into that took me forever to fix it. The way that I ended up actually fixing it, I had to go through and delete this panel, and let's remember what this was called. So PN tiles. So let's delete it. Toolbox. The metro disappeared. Hold on. Come on. So metro panel. Put it in there and then tell it to dock at the top. And then set the auto scroll to true. And let's see if that bug still persists. Oh, forgot to rename it. Okay. Tell you what, I'm just going to use the same link and add a test one. Okay, now the bug is fixed. And we can add a few more. So now that, because we have the auto scroll going, we can scroll through them. And let's go ahead and delete a few of them. And we're back to normal. Okay, so I did forget one thing. If you click on one of these and try to open that link we put in, it still tries to load it inside of this web browser, and we get some issues here. and that's just not going to work. So we we have to fix this. And if I can get this to respond, there we go. We need to go to our web browser and go to the events dialog or events window. Go down to navigating. Let's sort it. Navigating. And let's just click this to add the event. And let me paste this in here. Now I will say that this is code I found somewhere on Stack Overflow a long time ago. But basically all we're doing is if the URL that we're navigating to doesn't contain the about blank line in it, so if it's not creating a new page, we're going to cancel the navigating and tell the computer to start a new process, basically start a web browser using that URL. So now we should be able to test it, and those should work. So Harold Baldwin, view on site, and I've got a lot of tabs open here, but as you can see, it actually opens in the browser. Alright, thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something from this video. As always, the code will be on GitHub, and I'll post a link to that, and there will be a blog post related to this on Noob Grammar. I think that's about it. I'll see you next time.